Okay, so how's everybody doing? So I'm going to do some wet on wet painting here. So you can see my photo reference and back here. And this is the part that I love the most. Like the base colors have been laid in. Now for a lot of people, this is perfectly adequate, right? Like this will pass, like no problem. But each to his or her own, right? That's part of the hobby, how we like to go about things, and what we decide is sufficient for our standard, that we develop. And it's different for everybody, and it's always changing. The more we practice, the more skilled we become, and actually it can be a bit of a trap as well. The more OCD you can get and picky about things, and then it's only you seeing it. It's only you seeing the little anomalies that nobody else does see. But you can see here that I haven't painted this green yet, or I haven't, right, which would be this here, green. I'm going to do that last, and I haven't done these doors and windows yet. And I knocked that out, which is actually pretty good for all the handling I did here, but I have that piece. But I'll glue that in last, and that gets painted white like this. The trailer's in the way here, but you can sort of see. And then let me just point this out here. So see what I did here? Like, see this? Okay, so this here across is this here across, right? But what about this? So this was this plain, boring building. I don't know what was here. There's a funny sort of return here in the wall. Like, I have no idea what that is or what it was from, because these buildings have evolved over time and been renovated and bashed and rebuilt so many times and covered up, like here and here. But that might have been a loading bay. I mean, who knows, right? Seems weird that it would be that tight in a corner like that. But what I did was I took a building. Oh, here's the other photo for it. I took this building that was further down. There's that other building, like 2 or 3 in between this one and this one. And I wanted to change this corner because it was just too boring. And I wanted to match, like I mentioned earlier, to the sort of retaining wall that comes in. And then you can see I added a fire escape or back stair based on the inspiration of this, which is not the same, but it doesn't matter. But you can see this, see this almost octagon corner? You can see where I got that idea from here, right? And these style of windows. Okay. So that's what I did, and that's why I did it. And then I added in a loading bay, see? Okay. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to, basically put water on this. Like, I'm just going to use Vallejo. Like, it doesn't matter which one's model, color, air. I just use the air because they have a broad range of colors. I don't have to mess around to mix, and they're a different color palette than the model or the, I can't remember the other names, but they all have their own color range. And if you feel comfortable with a certain color range, and I like a lot of their earth tone colors from Model Air pre-mixed, for this, because you're only using tiny amounts, then that's how I like to use them. Yes, you can use them in your airbrush, but don't mix this. I'll say it again. Do not mix this paint with isopropyl alcohol. It doesn't like IPA. Use the Vallejo thinner that they recommend if you want to shoot this, because they're excellent paints if you want to shoot them through your airbrush. But I can achieve with Tamiya what I could achieve with this, because this is base color, right, or primary colors. And then I like to come in wet on wet and just stain paint and detail things up. Like an example would be like where this brickwork is, which, I really don't need to repaint this. It was just some red and some raw umber dusted over, and it's good to go, right? So if I paint some faded white, like some aged white, like this would be like a aged white, like washes and things, it'll probably run a bit over there and tone down and show a little bit of the plaster residue. So like a lot of it's just sort of incidental kind of flukiness, like sometimes with this kind of painting, like washes. Like, that's how you learn, and that's how you get results that you couldn't normally choreograph or think of, really. It's just allowing the paint and the water to you know, create its own kind of glazes and filters, etc. Now, I like to just mist with water sometimes. Like, I'll just show you quickly. You know, just wet it, right? Now, I can take a little bit of this, which is raw umber. Better put some water in the trench there. Okay, I can take a little bit of, you know, this, and then just stick it on. Just dab it on and let the water carry it around and flow it down and pool it up. And then look at it and say, okay, that's kind of cool. Like, you know, I can see what's happening there. You know, it adds another filter or shade, right? And will catch the, you know, the cracks of the plaster and stuff, right? So that's what you want to think about. If you use like a raw umber, burnt umber, or dark sea gray, I often use. Like, I would use it for this door here. But since I don't have any ready, I'll just stick some of this in here and just watch what happens, okay? See? Just a very thin wash, right? Just wet and then touch a little in, and it's good, right? Just try to think minimal, right? Try to think just a little bit, right? Because if you overdo it, it'll kill the effect. And you can build on that thin layer sort of methodology in an incremental way. And before you know it, you'll be layering filters and tones and colors and weathering like you never thought you could before, okay? Okay, so see the little line there where the plaster was? Remember the plastering, not this chipping, but the layer of crackle paste. See what it created? This layer of plaster. And then when I wet it down and just touched in just a tiny bit of pigment, it just capillaries around that line and puts a little shadow behind it. Just helps enhance and suggest. And then you can see this a little bit right there. I probably don't want those tie marks, so I can just come in and with a wet brush wiping off and just pulling it away. See? Just work in a small area. And then if you go, oh, I kind of like that, I'm going to leave that. So you can leave that and then move on. Like, you want to let that dry now. If you're happy with this, let it kick off, right? With acrylics, very fast, right? Like within 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And if I put water on this, it's dry, it's not moving. That's it. It's pretty much fixed. unless I take IPA. I remember how I said, well, wait a minute, he said not to put IPA on Vallejo. Yeah, that's right. And don't put IPA on this Tamiya paint because you'll cut through all this and you'll make a mess of it. But if you want to remove some of this, you can use IPA if you're okay with what it looks like. And it might be a nice weathering texture or result, right? But you got to be careful about that, okay? Just be safe and just use water with Vallejo. Because if I took straight IPA, I'll just say this in closing, if I took straight IPA right now, 99%, and I started going like this, it would take like a few seconds, it would start to rub through, right? And it might look cool. But that's the risk that you take. And those are some of the things you try to achieve this kind of, see these results? This is all external surface tints and staining, right? And filters. But you can remove things, and whatever's underneath here, which is probably this dark brown and then the plastic or gray, you can weather below the surface as well. Like if this is your main surface, we're building up water-based paints on the base Tamiya, you can cut through. Like, let me also say this. So if you paint this building with enamel, like spray bomb it, even some of the Tamiya polycarbonate and paints like that won't respond to IPA, like they repel it, okay? So they're quite resistant to it. Not entirely though, but quite a bit. But if I spray bomb this with a lacquer, like the whole building first, like let's say this raw umber, right? Then you could put Tamiya water-based paint on it all day long, right? No problem. And if you started putting IPA on it, it's going to cut through all the Tamiya and the Vallejo in one way or another, but it won't cut through that raw umber lacquer, the IPA. So the lacquer is impervious to IPA, right? Okay, so you will never have to worry about going, oh no, I've gone down too deep and I've exposed the white plastic. No, you'll always end up with this. Okay, and you can wet sand it. You can take some 1000 grit and rub that down with water and soften those edges. So there's a lot of little neat things you can do to create, weathered textures like this. And this particular example applies to armor, rusty cars, trains, buildings. It's the same basic fundamental application that's also varied with oil paints, lacquer, right? Like you learn all that. Like you're going to develop a system. Like I use basically Tamiya, Vallejo, right, which are water-based. Well, actually, Tamiya is actually ethanol-based, sorry. But you can mix it with water, though. That's why I like Tamiya as well. You can actually thin Tamiya with water if you don't want it to eat through, or IPA if you do want it to eat through. That's what's unique about Tamiya. If you're using a brush, which I don't use Tamiya with a traditional brush usually because it'll cut through itself. Whereas Vallejo paint won't do that. It'll just build another layer on top, right? Okay. So, and then in closing, I'll say you can put an oil wash on this right over top of the acrylics. I wouldn't recommend it the other way around. I don't recommend putting acrylics onto oils, but once the acrylics dry, I can put a oil of my choice, oil paint, right, with odorless mineral spirits, and it's transparent and it'll add another dimension to all of this. Like if I put a raw umber thin wash, it'll just kind of, okay? How's everybody doing? So, time for a little bit of OCD. I don't mind it once in a while. Actually, this part of the modeling is probably one of my favorites. What I want to show you here is just a couple little tricks. Once again, it's very thin paint, so I can build it up and I can adjust. If I, like that'll dry a little bit, what I just did on that center post in the window. Now you notice how the dark, see this dark here around the windows? That's the tiles and so on. That you see like in this photo right here. See the dark? Well, it's a good opportunity to make a window pop, right? Like in terms of color. There's really no color here, really. It's just grays and aged white. Um, but I'll just give you an example. So what I want to do here, especially with small profiles, is I just want to wet it. That way, when I stab paint into this, let's just call it an engraving, the paint will flow nice. In this case, the Vallejo, just a water-based paint, meaning you can use water as a base, like to mix it with. So I have some very, very thin, it's just called white. It's actually more of an aged white. There isn't a whole lot of difference between this one and the aged white. Like there's this white, which is a real extreme highlight for me in any case. And then there's what I just showed you there. There's just white, and then there's aged white. So they're just different tones, a little bit more cream in the aged white. So yeah, so here's an example of just flooding in a detail with a wash. And we normally think of washes as being a dark sort of pin wash, right? We never actually try like a light color, like doing it backwards, like the opposite. Because light gets into crevices and so on too, and it makes things reflect a certain way. And I find that when you're cutting small lines like this, you can just sort of wick it in, wick the paint in, and if it's not dark enough, within a matter of 30 seconds, it'll dry, and then you can put in another layer. But you can see how that just makes that window just enough there, right, to show how it's been overtaken by just really a lot of algae and just bad construction, bad renovation, right? Because all these colors here are all really a series of umber and aged white and a bit of gray, but all in the same tone. Like you see just right here, a little bit of green, just a little bit of olive, that was it. How that got there, could be a broken off pipe above from the eave dripping down, and it, as it's falling, it just catches the building right there on its way down. Do you know what I mean? Like this is really severe, and I really like this. I'll use a bit of Wooden Scenics green on that, just to touch that up so that it looks like, here's a closer photo of what's going on there. You can see that, right? Now where that's coming from, who knows? Maybe there was a drain pipe up here somewhere and it was changed at some point, and this is just residual leftover with algae that built up, and now it's got a footing, it's got texture for the algae to grow, right? But obviously there's something really bad going on here. And then the nice clean, you know, board and batten, which will really set this model off. Like this will all be that green, which will really be a nice, you know, that was why I chose this model as a subject and called it the Slum Landlord, because it just screams that, right? Okay, so thin little paints coming in, like just to close on this, like see this window here, like I put a little bit there, I'm gonna leave that so it's akin to this runoff, but then I can add a little bit to the outside of that isn't so exposed maybe to that kind of decay that's on that side of the window. Do you know what I mean? See? And it was really nothing to it, really, right? But photos, right? Like you need to study photos, you know. And then when you do, then you'll break off now and again. But try studying photos and keep it subtle, thin like this. And anyone can learn to paint this way. It's not hard. It just takes practice. That's all it does, right? Grab a Walther's kit and have fun with it. Throw paint on it. Wash all the paint off. Leave a little bit behind. Throw more on, wash it off, leave a little bit behind. That'll help get you started in this, what I call acrylic wet on wet staining process. Okay? Cheers. So just a basic green, to me a flat primer. It's all primer. All the XF paint is basically primer. And then I mixed up this color, which got a lot of blue in it, and that green. That's as close as you're going to get to that color, because this is, well, even this to this looks different. Same building, same time, different light. More green, more blue, right? So I'm just going to build up. Should have enough here of this if I don't spill it. I'm going to work this in. And once again, it doesn't have to be exactly like the prototype, right? Sometimes with a model, you want it to be a little more random and weathered, just because it's small. It's a small example of what you're used to looking at in terms of the full-size prototype and now the model. Check the color here, see? On the photo. It's the shadowy part, right? I would add, to get that, see? It's not green, is it? That there is almost a light blue gray when you think about it. If you're thinking of light and shadow, right? But in reality, it's green. See all the streaks? There can be white undercoat in there, white, light white, super thin white, some dark, see? It's not one color, okay? Okay, so I just wanted to show you this quick in closing. Notice the ground here, like all this work here. I don't know if that's too bright, but you can sort of see all that paint variation and anomaly. It's not really muddy. It has a muddy tone, but it's not blended. There's distinct colors there. See that? That's just the runoff. Let me just turn this ISO down a few notches. So that's just the like the runoff and the splattering, and the water's going to evaporate. I'm going to leave that because you can't really do it any better than that, in my opinion. I mean, from a minimalist point of view. If that's concrete and that's just debris and drip and whatever, from the building. It just looks fine, you know. Oftentimes I find that the less you touch the paint, like less is better. Like you'll find that when you're painting with wet on wet like this and stain painting, that it really does a lot of the work for you. So, you know, but you pick that up as you go along, right? Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to whip off some blinds here. So I just took a piece of printer paper, a fan brush, and some Tamiya or Vallejo, and just dump some on, streak it down, throw a little bit of, dip your brush, keep it wet, stroke it down. Even if it wrinkles, it doesn't matter, but it didn't with this, see? It didn't change the quality of the paper really. And then, so you get this sort of weathered, you know, this was, I think, a mixture of deck tan and I don't know, mud, so light mud. So I can just glue like that. I can put it part way up like a blind, you know, the old blinds. It works, right? Okay. Okay, so I just want to talk about this scene for a second in closing. I can't cover everything right now, so it's just way too much. And I mean, when I started building this layout, I knew I would have some photo opportunities, but it's turning out to be really very rich in terms of this layout being photogenic. But that's the way I've been planning it though. And it never shows at the beginning, right? Like this is 2 years in now or just over. And the first people that came on, I mean, they're obviously subscribers that have been all the way back to Glover Road, but there are people that drop in and go, okay, nothing to see here. And that's fine, right? If they come back later and see something, that's great. But things take time, you know? And what I like about this scene is that this was the greatest challenge actually in many ways, because when I built this old growth sort of scene here, which is only, it's about 3 feet long, like I wanted to transition and I had this sort of, it needed to end here. And I needed to transition into another kind of district, but in a way that was gentle and persuasive, right? That it wasn't jarring. And it's really worked out, and yet it was the biggest challenge on the whole layout. And that's what happens when you push through and you stick with things. Like, I don't mean push through like chronologically every day, because this layout's been 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 1 forward, 2 back. That's the way it is. I mean, I've tried to cover everything chronologically, but it's just impossible to do, because when you build a model railroad, you stall. You stall in a scene, and then you go to another scene. You're inspired, you something, and then you come back. You're walking past. Like, that's just the way it is. That's the beauty of the hobby. It's just a beautiful canvas to model and paint in, and you know, the bonus of running trains, operations, etc. I mean, name me a better hobby, right? I know I'm biased, but I know a lot of you are too, for good reason. But this scene, just in closing, has really been a blessing to me in many ways, because they were scenes that I picked up around the area. Like the old growth forest kind of scene is very regional to where I live, so that was easy to be inspired by that. The farmhouses, abandoned farmhouse, is very common out here in the valley. And then this was sort of the, you know, urban kind of scene in New West. And I'm really happy. Like when I first saw this building, I thought, oh my God, you know, what a sight for sore eyes. But then the character and the history and the stories that must be embedded in this facade, like this building, must be incredible, right? And then, of course, I added this piece here. This was a building further down, like at the prototype location, and it made sense here because I didn't want the wall just to go into the building and then a sort of a right angle. I wanted to sort of transition this area, and a good tip for doing that is to just use angles. Like try different shapes, you know, rising from where my thumb is here, the foreground to the background. Remember I talked about stacking scenery, about, you know, like you're viewing it from here, and then as you're viewing the scenery, whether it's buildings, trees, whatever, climbs up to your backdrop. So I really love this. It's like a mini movie set, and I can use it, like I can use several buildings. So I can use the warehouse and the diner, and it'll still make sense. You know what I mean? So I'm really happy with the way this worked out. So thanks for following the series. It's been just a thrill to build it, like to design it, build it, paint it, and then to be able to experience it and then have it be part of this River Road Railroad. It's just really been a lot of fun, and the reward is really cool. Okay, so thanks a lot for watching. Happy modeling, and I hope that you have a great day.